My parents emptied my college fund for my brother's BMW. Now he has to call me boss every morning. Growing up, my brother Jason was the golden child in every sense of the word. He was the firstborn, the son my parents always wanted, and apparently the only child that mattered. I was what my mother once called the insurance policy, when she thought I wasn't listening. From as early as I can remember, Jason got everything handed to him. When he wanted to play hockey, my parents bought him thousands of dollars worth of equipment. When he wanted a gaming setup, they converted the guest room into his personal gaming den. When I asked for a used laptop for school, my mother told me to use the family computer like everyone else. My grandmother on my father's side saw what was happening. She was the only person who ever treated me like I was worth something. When I was 12, she pulled me aside at Thanksgiving and told me she had started a college fund for me. She said it was our secret, and that she had been putting money into it since I was born. She passed away when I was 14, and I cried for weeks. But I held on to the promise of that fund like it was the last piece of her I had left. My parents became the executors of her estate, and they assured me the fund was safe. I believed them. I worked hard all throughout high school. I maintained a near-perfect GPA, took AP classes, did extracurricular activities, all because I knew that fund combined with scholarships could get me into a decent school and out of that house. Jason, meanwhile, barely graduated. He spent most of his time partying and playing video games, and my parents praised him for simply showing up to his graduation ceremony. The summer before my senior year, Jason turned 18 and decided he wanted a car. Not just any car, but a brand new BMW. He threw a fit when my parents said they couldn't afford it, screaming in the kitchen about how all his friends had nice cars. I was in my room studying when my mother knocked on my door. She sat on my bed and told me they had made a difficult decision as a family. She said Jason needed a car for his new job at our uncle's real estate firm. She told me they were going to use my college fund to buy him the car. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she was joking. She wasn't. I asked how she could do this when Grandma specifically left that money for my education. My mother said Grandma would have wanted what was best for the family, and Jason having reliable transportation was best for everyone. She told me I was smart enough to get scholarships and that I would figure it out. I didn't cry. Something inside me just went cold. The next week, Jason drove home in a shiny blue BMW and my parents threw him a celebration. He walked past me and said I should be happy for him because when he makes it big, maybe he'll let me borrow it. I did figure it out. I worked 2 jobs throughout my senior year. I applied to over 30 scholarships and got enough to cover most of my tuition at a state school. I took out loans for the rest. I majored in business and minored in computer science. I graduated top of my class and got recruited by a tech startup. I poured everything into that company because I had nothing else. No family support, no safety net, nothing but my own determination. 8 years later, that startup went public and I cashed out with more money than my parents would see in 10 lifetimes. But I didn't stop there. I kept working, kept building, kept acquiring. 6 months ago, I acquired a mid-sized real estate firm in my hometown. I didn't think much of it until I reviewed the employee roster and saw a familiar name. Jason. My brother had been working there for 7 years, never moving past junior agent. I called a meeting with all department heads to introduce myself as the new owner. I scheduled it on a day I knew Jason would be there. When I walked into that conference room in my designer suit, I watched my brother's face go completely white. He looked at me, then at the executives, then back at me, like he was waiting for someone to explain the nightmare he had walked into. The CEO introduced me by my full name, and Jason's coffee cup slipped out of his hand and shattered on the table. After the meeting, he cornered me in the hallway. He stammered about how he had no idea I was doing so well, how Mom and Dad never mentioned it, how we should catch up and let bygones be bygones. I smiled and said I had a company to run. Last night, my mother called. Jason had told her everything. She was crying, saying she couldn't believe I would humiliate my own brother, that I was being vindictive and cruel. She wanted to talk, to clear the air and move forward as a family. I told her I would think about it. What she doesn't know is that my uncle's original firm just filed for bankruptcy. And I know exactly who submitted the winning bid on all his properties. I sit in my office the morning after Mom's call, staring at the bankruptcy filing documents for Uncle Addison's properties spread across my desk. The winning bid paperwork has my signature ready to go. All I have to do is submit it to complete Jason's professional destruction. But Charlotte's concerned look from yesterday's executive meeting keeps replaying in my mind, making me hesitate in a way I haven't since I started building my empire. My pen hovers over the signature line. I've never second-guessed a business decision before. This should feel like justice, like the moment I've been working toward for years. Instead, my stomach twists every time I look at the documents. I set the pen down and pull up the employee roster on my computer. Jason's name sits there at the bottom of the junior agents list, and I remember how his coffee cup shattered on the conference table when he realized who I was. The memory should satisfy me. It doesn't. I close the file and open my email instead, scrolling through acquisition reports and quarterly projections, anything to avoid thinking about what signing those papers would actually mean. My assistant buzzes me at 2:30. Jason is here, she says, claiming it's a family emergency. Security wants to know if they should escort him out. I stare at the intercom button, finger hovering over it. Part of me wants to watch him get dragged out by security guards in front of the entire office. The other part, the part I don't want to acknowledge, wonders what could make him desperate enough to show up here after I made it clear I had nothing to say to him. I tell my assistant to send him up. 3 minutes later, he's standing in my doorway looking smaller than I remember. His expensive suit is rumpled, the tie loose around his neck like he's been pulling at it. He asks if we can talk somewhere private. His voice shakes slightly. I consider calling security anyway, just to see the panic in his eyes when they arrive, but curiosity wins out. I gesture to the chair across from my desk without saying a word. He closes the door behind him and sits down slowly, like he's not sure the chair will hold him. I lean back in my own chair and wait, keeping my face blank. Let him squirm. He doesn't make excuses or try to minimize what happened with the college fund. Instead, he tells me he's been in therapy for 6 months after his wife left him. His therapist helped him realize he's been a terrible brother his entire life. The apology sounds rehearsed, like he practiced it in the mirror this morning. But his hands shake as he talks, gripping the armrests of the chair so hard his knuckles turn white. He tells me about the therapy sessions where he finally understood what Mom and Dad did to me. To us. He says he knows sorry doesn't fix anything, that nothing can fix it, but he needed me to hear it anyway. I watch him carefully, looking for the con, the angle he's playing. Jason always has an angle, but this time I can't find it. This might be the first time Jason has ever been genuinely scared of consequences he can't charm his way out of. His voice cracks when he mentions the BMW and I realize he's actually crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just tears running down his face that he doesn't bother to wipe away. The sight makes something uncomfortable twist in my chest. I push it down. I don't accept his apology, but I don't throw him out either. I tell him I need time to think. It's true because the satisfaction I expected from watching him grovel isn't showing up the way I imagined. He nods like he expected that answer. He pulls a business card from his wallet and sets it on my desk. His therapist's card. He says he understands if I never want to speak to him again, but he needed me to know he finally gets what he took from me. Not just the money, he says, the security, the future, the feeling that someone believed in me. He stands up to leave and pauses at the door. For a second, I think he's going to say something else, make some last plea. But he just walks out, closing the door quietly behind him. I sit there staring at the therapist's card for 10 minutes after he's gone. Then I shove it in my desk drawer and try to get back to work. The bankruptcy documents are still sitting there, unsigned. That night, I call Charlotte. She picks up on the second ring and I can hear her kids arguing in the background. I tell her about Jason's visit, leaving out the part where his tears made me uncomfortable. She listens without interrupting, which is one of the things I value most about her. When I finish, she asks me a question that hits harder than it should. Will destroying him actually make me feel better? Or will it just make me feel powerful? I open my mouth to answer and realize I don't have one. The silence stretches between us. Charlotte waits, not pushing, just giving me space to figure it out. But I can't figure it out. The anger that's been driving me for so long suddenly feels hollow, like I've been running towards something that isn't actually there. I tell her I have to go and hang up before she can respond. I'm angry at her for asking the question, angry at myself for not having an answer, angry at everything. The uncertainty bothers me more than anything my family ever did. At least I knew how to deal with their neglect. This feeling, this doubt, I don't know what to do with it. 3 days later, Dad calls. I almost don't answer because I haven't spoken to him in 5 years. His name on my phone screen makes my heart race in a way I hate. I let it ring 4 times before I pick up. His voice sounds older, rougher around the edges. He tells me he had a heart attack last week. Nothing major, he says quickly, like he's worried I'll hang up. But enough to make him think about things he's been avoiding. I grip the phone tighter and wait for the apology, the explanation, something that makes sense of why he let Mom steal my future. It doesn't come. Instead, he says he's proud of what I built. He's ashamed he never told me that when it might have mattered. The words sound sincere, but they also sound 20 years too late. I don't know what to say. Part of me wants to tell him exactly where he can shove his pride. The other part, the part that still remembers being 12 and wanting him to notice me, wants to hold on to those words like they mean something. I tell him I'm glad he's okay and hang up before either of us can say anything else. I agree to meet him for coffee 3 days after that. I tell myself it's because Charlotte's question is still bothering me, and I need to prove I can face my family without falling apart. But really, I want to see if he's actually changed, or just scared of dying. We meet at a coffee shop halfway between my office and his house, neutral territory where neither of us has the advantage. He's already there when I arrive, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He remembered I take mine black. The gesture feels both thoughtful and manipulative, and I can't tell which one he intended. He looks tired and smaller, his hands shaking slightly as he stirs sugar into his coffee. We sit in uncomfortable silence for a full minute. I count the seconds in my head, waiting to see if he'll break first. He does. He admits he let Mom run the family because it was easier than standing up to her. He knows that makes him just as guilty as she is. Maybe more guilty, he says, because he saw what was happening and chose to look away. His voice is quiet, almost defeated. I've never heard my father sound defeated before. He tells me about the heart attack, how he woke up in the hospital and realized he might die without ever telling me the truth. The truth being that he was a coward. That he sacrificed me to keep the peace with Mom. That he's sorry, but he knows sorry doesn't change anything. 2 weeks pass, and I still haven't submitted the bid on Uncle Addison's properties. The documents sit in my desk drawer, unsigned, mocking me every time I open it. Charlotte notices my hesitation during our weekly strategy meeting. She asks if I'm having second thoughts, her tone careful, like she's testing ice she's not sure will hold. I snap that I'm being strategic, not emotional. Business decisions require timing and precision, but she gives me a look that says she knows better. She's known me long enough to see through the excuses. After the meeting, I sit alone in my office and admit the truth to myself. I'm realizing that winning this way might cost me more than losing ever did. The revenge I've been planning feels less like justice and more like becoming the kind of person who steals futures from people who need them. I close my eyes and see Grandma's face, the way she looked at me when she told me about the college fund. She wouldn't recognize what I've become. I'm not sure I recognize it either. Mom calls on Thursday and tells me she's organizing a family dinner. She doesn't ask if I'm free or if I want to come. She just informs me it's happening at her house this Sunday at 6. Dad will be there, she says. Jason too. Even Uncle Addison. Her voice has that sweet, manipulative tone that used to make me feel guilty for being angry. She says it's time we all moved past old hurts for the sake of family. Like hurt is something you can just decide to move past. Like family is a good enough reason to forget everything. I tell her I'll think about it. We both know that means I'm coming because I want to see what game she's playing now. She thanks me like I've already agreed and hangs up before I can change my mind. I sit there holding my phone, wondering why I keep letting her pull me back in. Maybe because some part of me still hopes she'll surprise me. Maybe because I need to see if she's capable of change. Or maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment. Sunday arrives and I drive to Mom's house for the first time in 3 years. The neighborhood looks the same, perfectly maintained lawns and houses that cost more than most people make in a decade. I park on the street instead of the driveway, keeping my escape route clear. Jason's car is already there, that same blue BMW he bought with my future. The sight of it makes my jaw clench. I take 3 deep breaths before I get out of my car and walk to the front door. Mom opens it before I can knock, like she's been watching for me. She hugs me and I stand there stiffly, not hugging back. The dinner is as awkward as I expected. Mom plays perfect hostess, offering drinks and appetizers like this is a normal family gathering. Dad sits quietly at one end of the table. Jason keeps his eyes on his plate. Uncle Addison looks tired, older than I remember. We make small talk about nothing, the weather and traffic and other safe topics that don't require honesty. Mom serves pot roast, my grandmother's recipe, and I wonder if she realizes how cruel that choice is. Halfway through dessert, Uncle Addison breaks the careful silence. He brings up his bankruptcy directly, looking at me across the table with resignation rather than anger. He says he knows I'm positioned to buy his properties. He doesn't blame me for it. The words hang in the air between us. I wait for the resentment, the accusation, but it doesn't come. He just looks tired. The victory I've been planning suddenly feels hollow instead of sweet. I excuse myself from the table and head to my car, but Jason follows me out to the driveway. He stands there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the ground instead of at me. He tells me he meant what he said in there about applying for other jobs. I lean against my car door and cross my arms, waiting to see if this is another manipulation tactic or something real. He explains that his therapist helped him realize he's been coasting on other people's work his entire life. First Mom and Dad, then Uncle Addison, and now he's worried I'll fire him just to prove a point. I tell him I'm not going to fire him because watching him struggle is more satisfying than watching him fail. He flinches at that but doesn't argue, which surprises me because the old Jason would have gotten defensive and stormed off. Instead, he nods and says he deserves that, then walks back inside to help Mom with the dishes. I sit in my car for a few minutes before driving away, trying to process what just happened and why it didn't feel as good as I expected. The next morning, I get an email from someone named Roman Garrison asking to meet for lunch. I don't recognize the name until I look him up and see he used to work at Uncle Addison's firm before the bankruptcy. My first instinct is to delete the message because I don't need anyone from Jason's old life trying to get a job or make excuses for him. But something about the tone of the email feels different, less desperate and more matter of fact, so I agree to meet him at a restaurant downtown. He shows up on time wearing a suit that's seen better days and orders coffee instead of food. He thanks me for meeting him and gets straight to the point without any small talk or flattery. He tells me he worked in the accounting department at the old firm and handled some of Grandma's estate paperwork when my parents were executors. I sit up straighter in my chair because this isn't what I expected at all. Roman pulls out a folder from his briefcase and slides it across the table. Inside are copies of old financial documents showing 2 separate college fund accounts, one for Jason and one for me. My hands shake as I flip through the pages and see Grandma's handwriting on the original setup forms, my name written in her careful script next to the account number. Roman explains that Mom came to the office about 6 months before Grandma died and convinced her to consolidate both funds into one larger account for Jason. He remembers it clearly because Grandma seemed uncertain about the decision and kept asking if I would still have enough for school. Mom assured her that Jason would share the money with me when the time came, that it was better to have one strong fund than 2 smaller ones. Roman tells me he tried to speak up and suggest keeping the accounts separate, but Mom shut him down and Grandma signed the papers. I feel sick reading through the documents because it means the betrayal started even before Grandma died, while she was still alive and trusting Mom to do right by both of us. I ask Roman why he's telling me this now after all these years. He says he's been carrying the guilt since Grandma passed away, knowing he should have pushed harder to stop Mom from manipulating an elderly woman. He quit the firm 2 years ago, partly because he couldn't stand watching Uncle Addison and Mom make decisions that hurt people for their own benefit. I thank him for the information and leave the restaurant feeling worse than I did before. The drive back to my office takes twice as long as usual because I keep pulling over to read through the documents again, trying to make sense of how deep this goes. Mom didn't just steal my college fund after Grandma died. She convinced Grandma to give it away before she even had a chance to protect it properly. The woman I thought understood me and valued me was manipulated in her final months by her own daughter-in-law. I show up at Mom's house the next afternoon without calling first. She opens the door with a smile that fades when she sees my face and the folder in my hands. I walk past her into the living room and drop the documents on the coffee table. She looks at them and her face goes pale, but she tries to recover by asking what this is about in that sweet voice she uses when she's pretending to be confused. I tell her I know about the original 2 funds and how she convinced Grandma to consolidate them. Mom sits down slowly on the couch and stares at the papers like they might disappear if she looks long enough. For the first time in my life, I watch her facade completely crack. She starts crying, not the manipulative tears she usually uses, but real ugly crying that makes her mascara run down her face. She admits she was terrified of having a daughter who might outshine her the way her own sister did when they were growing up. Her sister was prettier, smarter, more successful at everything, and their parents never let Mom forget it. When she had me, she saw the same potential and it scared her. So much she convinced herself that limiting my opportunities was protecting Jason, rather than sabotaging me. The explanation doesn't excuse anything, but it makes her human in a way I've never allowed myself to see. I sit down across from her and feel this complicated grief wash over me, because I wanted her to be a monster, not a damaged person who damaged me in turn. She keeps apologizing and saying she knows it's too late, that she can't undo what she did or give me back those years. I tell her she's right. It is too late for apologies to fix anything. But I also tell her I need to understand why she kept lying even after Grandma died, why she let me believe the fund was intact until the very last minute. Mom says she kept hoping Jason would do well enough that she could give me some money and pretend it came from the original fund. She wanted to fix her mistake without admitting she made one, which just made everything worse. We sit there in silence for a long time while she cries, and I try to figure out what to do with this information. Part of me wants to walk out and never speak to her again. Another part recognizes that understanding her motivations doesn't mean forgiving her actions, but it does mean seeing her as a complete person, instead of just the villain in my story. Charlotte pulls me aside after a board meeting 2 days later and tells me the company is suffering because I'm distracted by family drama. She's not mean about it, but she's direct, showing me reports where I missed important details and emails where I snapped at executives who didn't deserve it. I try to argue, but she cuts me off and reminds me that I built this company by being focused and strategic, not by letting emotions drive my decisions. She's right, and I know it, which makes hearing it even harder. I have to choose between pursuing revenge that's eating me alive or building the company I worked so hard to create. The choice should be obvious, but it's not because part of me still wants to watch my family suffer the way I suffered. Charlotte asks me what Grandma would want me to do with the success I've built, and the question hits me harder than any lecture could. Grandma wanted me to have opportunities and build something meaningful, not waste my energy destroying people who hurt me. I tell Charlotte I need a few days to think, and she squeezes my shoulder before leaving my office. Dad calls that night and tells me he's having bypass surgery next week. His voice sounds weak and uncertain, nothing like the distant authority figure I remember from childhood. He says he'd like me there at the hospital, not because he deserves it, but because he's asking anyway. I say yes before I can overthink it, surprising both of us with how quickly I agree. The day of the surgery, I show up at the hospital and Jason is already in the waiting room. We sit in uncomfortable silence for 3 hours, occasionally checking our phones or getting coffee, but mostly just existing in the same space without acknowledging each other. When the surgeon finally comes out and says Dad made it through, okay, Jason turns to me with relief written all over his face. He tells me he's glad I came because Dad wouldn't have admitted how much he wanted me here. I nod and don't say anything back because I'm not ready to have a deep conversation about our family dysfunction in a hospital waiting room. We sit with Dad during his recovery for another hour before the nurses kick us out, and Jason offers to walk me to my car. I accept because it feels less awkward than refusing. Over the next 2 weeks, I spend more time with my parents than I have in 10 years. Dad's recovery requires daily visits and help with basic tasks, which means I'm at their house every afternoon after work. Mom tries to revert to her manipulation tactics during the first few visits, suggesting family dinners and asking when I'll forgive everyone and move on. I shut her down immediately each time, telling her that showing up to help Dad doesn't mean everything is fixed between us. She looks hurt but backs off, and I notice Dad watching these exchanges with something that looks like respect. One afternoon when Mom is in the kitchen, Dad tells me privately that he wishes he'd learned to stand up to her decades ago. He explains that it was easier to let her run the family than deal with the conflict that came from disagreeing with her. I tell him that taking the easy path hurt his kids, and he needs to own that instead of just blaming Mom. He agrees without making excuses, which is the closest thing to accountability I've ever gotten from him. I make my decision about Uncle Addison's properties on a Tuesday morning after another sleepless night thinking about Grandma. I pull up the bid paperwork and change the lowball offer to a fair market price, something that will benefit my company without destroying Uncle Addison completely. Charlotte notices the change when she reviews the documents before submission and doesn't say anything, but she squeezes my shoulder as she leaves my office. The bid wins anyway because my company is strong enough that I don't need to be ruthless to succeed. The realization hits me hard because it means I can win without cruelty, that being better than my family doesn't require becoming worse than them. I call Uncle Addison and tell him the properties are now part of my portfolio, and instead of the gloating speech I planned months ago, I offer him a consulting position helping manage them. He accepts with genuine gratitude rather than entitlement, thanking me for giving him a chance to stay involved in his life's work. The arrangement works because we're both professionals who can separate business from family dysfunction. Jason calls me 3 weeks later and tells me he got a job at a smaller firm in a different city. He's taking a significant pay cut to start over where nobody knows his family name. I expect him to ask for my approval or financial help, but instead he just tells me about the position and says he's excited to build something on his own merit. I tell him good luck and mean it, surprised by my own sincerity. He thanks me and hangs up without dragging the conversation out, which feels like growth for both of us. Charlotte mentions later that week that I seem more focused during meetings, less distracted by family drama, and more engaged with company strategy. I tell her she was right about everything, that revenge was eating me alive and building something meaningful matters more than destroying people who hurt me. 3 months pass and Uncle Addison's properties are integrated into my company's portfolio, performing better than the projections predicted. I offer him a permanent consulting position with actual responsibilities and competitive pay. He accepts and starts showing up to the office twice a week, contributing ideas that improve our property management systems. The arrangement works because we're both professionals who can separate business from family dysfunction, and it feels good to win without anyone having to be completely destroyed. Mom asks to meet for coffee one afternoon, just the two of us, and actually listens when I explain the boundaries I need for any relationship to be possible. She doesn't become a different person overnight, but she stops trying to manipulate me into family gatherings and starts asking what I'm comfortable with instead. It's not the mother-daughter relationship I wanted as a kid, but it's honest in a way we've never been before. I schedule the first family dinner at a neutral restaurant where nobody can claim home territory advantage. Mom arrives early and tries to rearrange the seating, but I tell her everyone sits where I assigned them. Dad looks uncomfortable in his button-down shirt like he's forgotten how to dress up, and Jason shows up exactly on time without the usual 15-minute lateness he used to think made him important. I lay out the rules before we even order food. Monthly dinners happen on the last Sunday of each month, no exceptions or rescheduling for convenience. No surprise visits to my office or home. No using family connections to ask for business favors or job references. No bringing up the past unless someone specifically wants to discuss it. Mom's face goes tight when I finish talking, her fork hovering over her salad like she's deciding whether to argue. Dad nods slowly and says the structure makes sense, which surprises me because I expected him to side with Mom like always. Jason agrees without making excuses or jokes, just a simple acknowledgement that he'll follow the boundaries. The dinner itself is awkward and stilted, full of careful small talk about weather and traffic, but nobody storms out or starts crying. We make it through appetizers and entrees without any major blow-ups, and when the check comes, I pay it before anyone can argue about splitting it. Mom tries to hug me in the parking lot, but I step back and offer a handshake instead, which she takes with visible hurt in her eyes. The drive home feels longer than it should, my hands tight on the steering wheel as I process the strange feeling of having my family follow rules I set, instead of expectations they created. The next 5 months follow the same pattern with small improvements each time. Mom stops trying to control the seating arrangements and starts asking about my work without the fake enthusiasm she used to use. Dad contributes more to conversations instead of sitting silent while Mom dominates every topic. Jason talks about his job search and apartment hunting without expecting praise for basic adult responsibilities. Nobody mentions the college fund or the BMW or any of the years when I didn't matter to them. The new normal isn't warm or loving or anything like the families I used to envy growing up, but it's honest in a way we never managed before. I can sit through dinner without feeling like I'm being erased or dismissed, and that's more than I ever thought I'd get from them. 6 months after establishing the dinner routine, I get a letter in the mail with Jason's return address. Inside is a check for $15,000 and a handwritten note on plain paper. The note says he's been saving since he started his new job, putting aside money every month even when it meant eating ramen and skipping nights out with coworkers. He knows it doesn't fix what was stolen or make up for the years he benefited while I struggled, but he needed to return what the BMW cost. The amount matches exactly what my parents took from the college fund, down to the dollar, which means he looked up the actual purchase price instead of guessing. I stare at the check for a long time, holding it up to the light like I'm checking if it's real. Part of me wants to tear it up and mail the pieces back to prove I don't need his money or his guilt. Another part wants to cash it immediately and use it for something meaningful that Grandma would have approved of. Instead, I put it in my desk drawer and leave it there, unable to decide what accepting it would mean about forgiveness or moving forward, or whether any amount of money can represent what was actually taken from me. The check sits in that drawer for weeks while I go about my normal routine of board meetings and property acquisitions and monthly family dinners. Charlotte notices me staring at my desk during a strategy session and asks if I'm okay. I tell her about the check and she doesn't offer advice or tell me what I should do, just listens while I work through my confusion out loud. Having the check feels different from I expected. Less like victory and more like acknowledgement that something wrong happened and someone tried to make it right even though they can't. I still haven't cashed it by the time the next family dinner rolls around, but knowing it exists changes something small in how I see Jason across the table. A year passes since I acquired the firm, and my company is the most successful real estate operation in 3 counties. The quarterly reports show consistent growth, and the employees who stayed through the transition are thriving under the new management structure. My office has floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, and a view I earned through years of work nobody in my family witnessed or supported. I still see my therapist every Tuesday morning before the staff meeting, talking through the complicated feelings that come with success built on anger, and the slow process of turning that anger into something less destructive. The sessions help me sleep better and think clearer, though my therapist reminds me that healing from decades of neglect doesn't happen in neat time frames or follow predictable patterns. Mom and I have coffee sometimes outside the monthly dinners, usually at her request, and she's learning to ask about my life instead of trying to fix or manage it. Dad sends occasional text messages about articles he reads or shows he thinks I'd like. Small attempts at connection that feel genuine even if they're awkward. Jason is building his own career path in a different city without using family connections or expecting anyone to smooth his way forward. The distance between us feels healthy rather than hostile, like we're finally separate people instead of roles assigned by parents who didn't know better. Charlotte was right about everything, though I didn't want to admit it back when she first questioned my revenge plans. Destroying Jason wouldn't have made me feel better or healed the wounds from childhood. It would have just made me someone who uses power to hurt people the way I was hurt. Building boundaries and watching him actually grow into someone who takes responsibility did something revenge never could have accomplished. The cold anger that drove me for so long has transformed into something more like peace. Not complete or perfect, but sustainable. I can run my company without spite as the primary motivation, and that shift makes me better at the actual work of building something meaningful. I'm planning a major company expansion that will create 200 jobs in the hometown that watched me leave with nothing and return with everything. The project includes affordable housing developments and commercial spaces designed to revitalize neighborhoods that have been struggling since the manufacturing plants closed. I've already identified positions for people who've been loyal through the transition, employees who stayed when they could have jumped to competitors, and who believed in the company vision even when it wasn't clear where we were heading. Jason isn't on that list because he's building his own path now in a different city, working for a small firm where his last name doesn't mean anything, and his success depends entirely on his own effort. The separation between his career and mine feels right, like we're finally living separate lives instead of competing in the same space where comparison was inevitable. Mom and Dad will probably tell their friends about my success and show people articles about the expansion without ever quite understanding what it cost me to get here. They'll take some credit for raising me even though they spent most of my childhood making me invisible, and I've accepted that their version of events will always differ from mine, but I've stopped needing them to understand or acknowledge the full truth of what happened. The grandmother who believed in me when nobody else did would be proud of what I built and how I built it. And that matters more than any validation my parents could offer now. Her college fund was stolen, but her faith in me wasn't. And I carried that faith through every scholarship application and student loan payment and 80-hour work week until it became the foundation for everything I achieved. The expansion project is named after her, A small detail that won't make headlines but means everything to me. Sometimes success isn't about proving people wrong or making them sorry. It's about building something good enough that their opinions stop mattering.